Right now, something inside your body is watching everyone around you, scanning, judging, and you have absolutely no idea it's happening. That is not a metaphor. You have a second immune system, one that operates entirely without your knowledge or consent. It doesn't use white blood cells, it doesn't deploy antibodies, it works through your eyes, your nose, and the ancient parts of your brain that were making survival decisions long before the part of you that can read these words ever existed. Scientists call it the behavioral immune system. And once you understand what it is, you will never look at another person the same way again. Let's start with a problem. Because to understand why this system exists, you have to understand what your ancestors were up against. And the answer is something that kept evolutionary biologists up at night for decades before anyone figured it out. It wasn't predators. Yes, the predators were horrifying. The cave lions, the saber-toothed cats, the short-faced bear that weighed over 1,000 kilograms and could outrun a horse. Real, documented, nightmare-grade threats that your ancestors navigated every single day. But here is the thing about predators. You can see them, you can hear them, they leave tracks. They have a physical presence in the world you can orient to. You can run, you can fight, you can post a watch, you can build a fire, you can collectively coordinate a response. A pathogen does none of those things. A pathogen is invisible. It has no weight, no sound, no footprint, no smell you can reliably detect. It does not stalk you from the tree line. It does not circle your camp at night. It simply passes from one warm body to the next through the air, through touch, through water, through food, with no announcement whatsoever. And by the time you know it's inside you, it has been there for days, sometimes weeks. In a group of 30 to 50 people, the typical size of a hunter-gatherer band, one sick individual could silently transmit an infection to every single person they shared space with before a single symptom appeared. No warning, no signal. Just one ordinary interaction, one shared meal, one night sleeping close for warmth, and the entire community was exposed. And in a world with no antibiotics, no antiviral medication, no IV hydration, no fever management beyond cold river water and whatever plants someone had noticed seemed to help, a serious infectious outbreak in a small band was not a medical inconvenience. It was potentially a extinction-level event for that group: cholera, typhoid, smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis. The history of humanity is soaked in the mass casualties of pathogens far more than it is in casualties of predators. The Black Death alone killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's entire population in under a decade. And the Black Death happened in the 14th century when humans already had cities and trade routes and written medicine. Imagine what a comparably virulent pathogen did to a group of 40 people living in a rock shelter in the Pleistocene. Now here is the question that should keep you up at night. How did any of us survive? The answer is behavioral. And it is older than medicine, older than language, older than the concept of disease itself. Long before your ancestors understood what a pathogen was, long before germ theory, long before microscopes, long before anyone could name the mechanism, they could feel something was wrong. There was something about the person with the glassy, unfocused eyes. Something off about the one with the pallid skin and the wrong kind of stillness. Something that felt not quite right about a face that seemed subtly asymmetrical in ways that healthy faces did not. The posture that slumped in a way that wasn't exhaustion. The smell that was different in a way you couldn't name. None of your ancestors could have explained what they were responding to. They had no framework, no vocabulary, no scientific model. But they felt it, and they moved away. The ones who moved away lived longer, had more children, passed on the biology that made them move. The ones who didn't were removed from the gene pool with brutal efficiency. This is evolution. This is what it actually looks like when natural selection builds a survival mechanism into a species. Not dramatic, not a superpower, just a faint, wordless signal in the body of a person standing near someone sick, nudging them gently to be somewhere else. Multiplied across 10,000 generations, made stronger with each one, until it lives in you right now, running silently in the background of every social interaction you have ever had. Psychologist Mark Schaller at the University of British Columbia has spent the better part of 2 decades documenting what this system actually does. His findings are extraordinary. When people are shown photographs of visibly sick individuals, people with skin lesions, visible swelling, the flat effect of high fever, their behavioral avoidance responses activate immediately. That much you'd expect. But here's what you wouldn't expect. Their physical immune response also activates. The white blood cell activity increases. Cytokines, the proteins your immune system uses to coordinate its internal defense against pathogens, begin to mobilize. The body begins preparing for an infection that has not yet occurred, based entirely on visual information. You look at a sick person, and your blood chemistry changes. Not because you touched them, not because you breathed their air, because you saw them. That is the behavioral immune system doing its job. It fires before exposure. That is the entire design. It is not a response to infection. It is a response to the possibility of infection. It is a preemptive strike executed by your biology the moment your eyes detect the relevant cues, because in the ancestral environment, waiting for confirmation was already too late. Now, here is where the story gets more complicated and more uncomfortable. The behavioral immune system is not precise. It cannot be. It has no way to actually detect a pathogen. It has no molecular sensor, no viral receptor, no bacteria detection mechanism. What it has are proxies, a list of visual and olfactory cues that, over hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary pressure, have been associated with infectious disease, pallor, asymmetry, unusual movement, swelling, discoloration, unfamiliar body odor, lesions, the subtle wrongness of a body that is fighting something. Most of the time, when someone displays these cues, they are genuinely unwell, and keeping distance from them is genuinely protective. The system works because it is calibrated to patterns that held true across hundreds of thousands of years in the ancestral environment. But cues misfire. Skin conditions that are entirely non-contagious trigger it. Physical disabilities that carry zero infectious risk trigger it. Extreme fatigue from overwork, grief, or sleep deprivation triggers it. Certain medications that alter facial appearance trigger it. And here is the part that should genuinely stop you cold. People in these situations are, on average, rated as less attractive, less socially desirable, less trustworthy, not because observers have made a conscious judgment, but because an ancient system wired into the deepest parts of the brain has flagged them and adjusted the observer's perception accordingly. The observer doesn't know this is happening. They experience it as a vague feeling, a slight preference not to get too close, a mild, unexamined sense that something is off. They would not be able to explain it. They might not even be aware of it. But the behavioral immune system has already rendered a verdict, and it is shaping behavior invisibly. This is one of the most important findings in evolutionary psychology in the last 30 years, and it receives almost no mainstream attention. The stigma that historically and still today attaches itself to visible illness, disability, and certain physical differences is not purely social. It is not purely cultural. Part of it is biological. Part of it is a misfiring of a 300-year-old protection system that cannot distinguish between a person with a virulent respiratory infection and a person with a lifelong skin condition. The system was never designed for nuance. Nuance takes time. In the ancestral environment, time was the resource you did not have. Let's go deeper. Because the behavioral immune system does not operate at a fixed intensity, it is dynamic. It responds to your internal state. Research consistently shows that when people are already physically vulnerable, when they are fighting a mild infection, severely sleep deprived, nutritionally depleted, or under high physiological stress, the behavioral immune system increases its sensitivity. Disgust responses become stronger, avoidance tendencies become more pronounced, the signal gets louder precisely when you need the protection most. When your internal defenses are compromised, your external defenses compensate. The system is not static, it calibrates in real time, and it works in the other direction with equal precision. Studies published in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior document that the behavioral immune system is measurably stronger in pregnant women and specifically strongest during the first trimester. This is not a coincidence. The first trimester is the period when the physical immune system intentionally downregulates itself to prevent the body from rejecting the genetically foreign developing fetus. The immune system essentially lowers its own firewall during the most critical developmental window, and the behavioral immune system picks up the slack. When the internal defense goes down, the external one goes up. The body is not naive. It has been solving these problems since long before any of us existed. But here is the dimension of the behavioral immune system that almost nobody talks about, the one that reaches into every corner of human history. Because the system doesn't only protect you from individual sick people, it scales. And when it scales, it doesn't just change how you behave toward one person at a party. It changes how you feel about entire groups of people you have never met. Schaller and colleagues across multiple institutions have documented a consistent pattern. Populations historically exposed to higher levels of infectious disease, regions where epidemic pathogens were endemic, where mortality from infectious illness was structurally elevated across generations, show stronger in-group preferences, more conformity to established social norms, greater wariness of outsiders and unfamiliar cultural practices, higher levels of ethnocentrism. Read that list again, because every single one of those traits has historically been analyzed as a purely cultural phenomenon, a product of ideology. Religion, geography, economics, and those factors matter. But underneath all of them, running silently, is the behavioral immune system. In the ancestral environment, contact with an unfamiliar group carried a specific category of risk that had nothing to do with hostility. It carried the risk of pathogen introduction. Your band had developed immunity to the pathogens circulating within your own group. You had no immunity to the pathogens circulating in a group you had never encountered. The history of colonialism demonstrates this dynamic with devastating clarity. When European explorers made contact with isolated indigenous populations, the diseases they introduced killed not 10%, not 20%, but in some cases over 90% of entire populations who had no prior exposure to those pathogens and therefore no immunity. Ancient humans could not have understood the mechanism, but they could feel the consequence. Strangers sometimes made people sick in ways that people from within the group did not. The behavioral immune system encoded this pattern. It learned, across generations, to treat unfamiliarity itself as a potential disease signal, and that encoding is still in you. This does not excuse tribalism. It does not justify xenophobia or discrimination or any of the social behaviors that have caused immeasurable human suffering across history. Understanding why a system exists is not the same as endorsing what it does when the environment it was built for no longer exists. But it matters enormously that we understand it, because a force you cannot see, cannot name, and are not aware of is far more dangerous than one you can examine directly. Naming it is the first step to not being controlled by it. We live in a world now that is profoundly different from the one the behavioral immune system was designed for. Global travel means that pathogen exposure risks have shifted in ways no evolutionary system could have anticipated. Modern medicine has made diseases manageable that would have been death sentences in the ancestral environment. Germ theory means we can distinguish between a contagious respiratory infection and a non-contagious autoimmune condition with a skin presentation, something no ancient human could have done. The factual basis for many of the behavioral immune system's default responses has changed entirely. The system has not kept up. It is running 300,000-year-old software on a 21st century world, and the mismatches are everywhere. So the next time you feel that pull at a party, that wordless, automatic lean away from someone who looks unwell, understand what is actually happening inside you. You are not being rude, you are not being shallow, you are not making a rational assessment. You are running a survival program that was written before language, tested across an almost incomprehensible span of human experience, and kept in your DNA because it worked. Because the ancestors who felt it survived and the ancestors who didn't were lost. You are the living result of every one of those people. Every person who leaned back from a sick tribesman. Every mother in a Pleistocene winter who kept her children away from the coughing elder. Every ancient human who slept on the far side of the fire from someone whose face looked wrong in a way they couldn't name. All of them in a chain that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years, leading directly to you. And tonight, somewhere, someone near you is going to cough. And before you finish the thought you're currently having, something ancient and invisible inside you will already have moved.